Hi guys, I'm Mr. Smith. Those of you who went to St. Joseph's for GCSE will know me, but those of you who are looking at this who are not past pupils of St. Joseph's won't yet, but hopefully you will get to know me if you choose English. So I'm responsible for the poetry section of the A-level course. Now, before I get into it, I know when I say the word poetry, a lot of people go, oh God, it's so many problems associated, I can't do poetry. So what I thought I'd do is I'd pick up 3 of the most kind of common questions or problems with poetry and try and kind of dispel some of those myths and answer those for you today, so that you can have a clearer idea of what to expect and a more realistic idea of what the poetry course is about. So the first one is that poetry's not for me. It's not my cup of tea at all. Now, there is no type for poetry. You know, you don't have to be kind of one of these foppish types that walks around in a long kind of trench coat waffling on about flowers and clouds and all this kind of stuff. No, I've loved poetry most of my life, and I've studied poetry, worked with it for most of my life, and I grew up typical sports fan. You know, most days I wake up with a face that looks like something off Crime Watch. I'm not your typical poetry type, but I absolutely love poetry. So hopefully if you choose to take the course, you'll see why. I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about why. Okay. The second one is, and I hear it all the time from sort of Key Stage 3 up, I don't get poetry. So what I'm going to do is let you in on a little secret now. Nobody gets poetry, right? You can't get poetry. It's not like maths. It's not an equation where there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and that's why I love poetry so much, right? Because poetry is like detective work almost. Okay, you need to work out what you think the poet means, and to do that often you need other clues. You'll need things like context, so you need to know about the poet's life, or you need to know about their driving motivations and the themes that they were writing about, and then you would use that to work out what the poet is actually driving at in the poem. It's a process. Okay, it's fantastic. I love that part of it. Right, as I said, it's like being a literary detective. So it's never kind of black and white. And I would never criticise any student of mine for having a go at something and maybe being a little bit off the mark, because by doing that, that's when kind of the greatest new discoveries are made, and that's where we really start to get into what poetry means. Okay, so that's the second one. And the third one is, it's boring. Poetry is really, really boring. It's not. What we've got to remember is that we live in the 21st century, all right? And day to day, in our modern era, poetry is kind of like a frippery. You know, poetry is a nice thing that people sometimes write and sometimes read, and sometimes they pick up the odd book of poetry or whatever. And your experiences of it are probably limited to, oh, you had to write a poem for St. David's Day in school, or maybe you're one of those kind of Casanovas who wrote a little poem for a girlfriend on Valentine's Day, that kind of thing. Poetry is much more than that. Okay, when you trawl through history, you know, and you look at some of the greatest kind of schools of thought, revolutions, uprising, changes, shifts in social thinking, poetry is right at the middle of it. Right? It's no mistake, right, that when totalitarian governments used to come into power, used to get new dictators coming into countries, some of the first people that we get rid of are the poets and the teachers. So I'd be stuffed. But the poets and the teachers, why? Because they were the radical thinkers. They were the ones that were stirring people up. All right? It's never, never dull. And hopefully, if you take English, I'll get to show you a bit of why. Okay?